Around 9 p.m. on February 3rd, approximately 50 out of 150 cars on a rail line were derailed in East Palestine, a small town near the Ohio-Pennsylvania border that has a population of nearly 5,000 people. Now, about 5 of these tanker cars were carrying a toxic substance called vinyl chloride. Now, the substance was at risk of exploding because of this accident. Now, an immediate evacuation was ordered by the governor to anyone who lived within a 1 to 2 mile radius of this accident, which is basically the entire population of East Palestine. Now, ultimately, the governor chose to burn the chemicals in what they called a quote unquote controlled release. Here's what that controlled release looked like. As you look at those flames, look at the dark cloud and plume that's forming over this small town. This plume is something that has been seen by people who are flying overhead on commercial airplanes and taking pictures of it. It came up even through the cloud cover. Now, a few days after this happened, on February 8th, the governor and other officials actually started encouraging people to come home, to go back to school, go back to work, assuring them, hey, we've tested the air, we've tested the water, everything is safe, come home. In the wake of this accident, it's important that we take a closer look at what was spilled and what they burned. Now, in this accident, there were also other cars that were carrying other toxic chemicals like butyl acrylate and ethylhexyl acrylate. Those were breached and either all or some of the chemicals released during the crash. But a lot of the focus in the wake of this accident has been focused on these 5 tanker cars carrying vinyl chloride. Now, this is a very hazardous and flammable substance. It boils at 8 degrees Fahrenheit, and so it's shipped in a liquid form. Now, when these train cars crashed, it started spewing this toxic boiling liquid gas, but it hadn't been set on fire yet in, again, what they're calling as a successful controlled release. Now, vinyl chloride is a known carcinogen linked to central nervous system effects, and chronic exposure has been shown to cause liver damage and cancer. OSHA has a permissible limit of how much you can be exposed to during, on average, an 8-hour period as 1 ppm, or 1 part per million. To give that a little bit of context, now before this accident in Ohio, there was a spill in New Jersey with 1 car with this substance that spilled about 23,000 gallons from that car, but the substance, while it contaminated the area around it, it did not catch on fire. Now you compare that to what we just saw in that explosion in Ohio. This spill had 5 tanker cars that totaled a likely million gallons of this toxic chemical, not only spilling into the ground, it was boiling into the air, and then when it caught on fire because of this controlled release that the governor and others deemed a success, something very different happened. It doesn't appear that these government officials actually took into account that a byproduct of burning this vinyl chloride is hydrogen chloride. It is unstable and latches onto water in the atmosphere and turns into hydrochloric acid. So their decision to burn off this vinyl chloride could result in hundreds of thousands of pounds of this acid sitting in the air. The company responsible for this accident is Norfolk Southern. They are legally liable for this. Now, it's not going to come as any surprise to you that they're downplaying this disaster as much as they possibly can. They're trying to tell everybody, hey, this is safe. There's no danger here. It's fine for you and your children and your pets to come back home. But it should and has been raising some red flags in the local community there when they're being asked to sign documents like this. Now, this document would provide agencies commissioned by Norfolk Southern and others to go in and provide testing to them, but look down there at the paragraph below that second box. The landowner agrees to indemnify, release, and hold harmless Unified Command, the company doing the testing, from and against any and all legal claims. Red flag. Why are they trying to waive any legal responsibility? Now, Norfolk Southern is boasting, amongst many other things, about how they're offering $1,000 to residents to help them with their expenses after having been forced to evacuate. $1,000? Here's the catch. You can't get that money until you sign a form. So what's their real motive here? There's some attorneys that have been warning some of the residents there in East Palestine not to sign the paper and not to take the money because it could limit their ability to hold Norfolk Southern accountable. $1,000. This is coming from a company that makes multi-billion-dollar profits every single year. Not only has Norfolk Southern been derelict in its response and its responsibilities, so has the Biden administration. On February 16th, Pete Buttigieg actually showed his hand and told us why he doesn't really care about this. He's underplaying the significance of this disaster. Let's hear it in his own voice.
Look, rail safety is something that has evolved a lot over the years, but there's clearly more that needs to be done because while this horrible situation has gotten a particularly high amount of attention, there are roughly 1,000 cases a year of a train derailing.
It made me sick to hear him say that. He's saying, oh, well, this one is getting a lot of attention, but maybe it really shouldn't because this happens over 1,000 times a year. We should not be surprised that Norfolk Southern and the Biden administration just don't care about this catastrophe. If they did care, they would have taken action to prevent this kind of thing from happening in the first place. Pete Buttigieg just showed we know that this happens over 1,000 times a year. So what action did the administration take to try to prevent this sort of accident happening in East Palestine? Or after that accident, another one happened in Michigan, and the many more that we never hear about. Norfolk Southern, they make billions of dollars a year, and yet they continue to use archaic technology in their trains, and they're doing nothing to protect the countless communities that they travel through every single day of the year, many times carting toxic chemicals like the ones we're seeing in Palestine. Now, Pete Buttigieg and the Biden administration, the Department of Transportation, they know very well that our rail lines are dilapidated and need to be upgraded and modernized along with all of our other crumbling infrastructure in this country. So the question that you have to ask yourself, does my town have a railway line running through it or nearby? Given what's carted throughout this country every single day, there's a good chance there is. These railways go through towns and communities and cities all across the country. How can you live a normal life? How can you sleep soundly at night if you know that at any moment these trains can be derailed, go off the tracks, have an accident, these cars upturned, and potentially have these toxins spewing out, endangering your family and entire community, not only on the short term with the incident of these accidents, but with the long term and the illnesses and cancers and other things that are likely to come about as a result of the exposure that people in East Palestine are seeing right now. We, the American people, need to be able to have the confidence that we're safe, that the corporations are acting responsibly, that they are taking safety measures, that they're investing in that safety technology. Right now, it's clear that they aren't. We need to be able to have faith and peace of mind that our government that exists to serve the people is doing its job, taking these safety measures, making these investments in our infrastructure to keep us, our families, our kids, and our communities safe. But they're not. Now, the White House is talking tough. They're claiming, hey, we're going to hold those responsible accountable. Okay, show us how. Here's what they're proposing. Possible civil penalties. Possible civil penalties. And oh, by the way, they're also going to require that Norfolk Southern actually pay to clean up the mess and disaster that they've caused. That's it. That's it. If I were one of those families, I would be outraged and insulted that this is what our government thinks of us, the American people. Possible civil penalties, and let's make them pay to clean this crap up. There is so much more that must be done. Now, something else happening parallel to this and indirectly connected to it is a case against this same company, Norfolk Southern, that is sitting before the Supreme Court right now. And just to show who the Biden administration really cares about, they're siding with Norfolk Southern in this case against the plaintiff, who's a former employee of Norfolk Southern named Robert Mallory, and who was diagnosed with colon cancer. Mallory is suing his former employer, saying that his cancer is a direct result of exposure to asbestos and other toxic chemicals that he had to work with while working for Norfolk Southern, and that his former employer failed to take necessary steps to protect him and other employees. Norfolk Southern and Biden's Department of Justice are working hand in hand to try to get this case thrown out of the Supreme Court based on jurisdiction issues. They're saying that Mallory doesn't have a right to have his day in court because he didn't file the lawsuit in the right jurisdiction. And for a national company with railways that travel all across this country, of course they want to limit where, when, and how people can file lawsuits against them, limiting their liability. They want to limit it to those jurisdictions where they feel they would have a more positive consideration to rule in favor of the corporation and against the people who are trying to hold them responsible for their actions. So the Supreme Court's ruling on this case will set a very important precedent that could either help or hinder the ability of those across the country and those residents of East Palestine, Ohio, to file lawsuits against Norfolk Southern due to their exposure to these hazardous chemicals and to hold this company responsible. We, the people, need to demand more. We need to demand real accountability. We have Congress quick to celebrate how willing they are to go and send over $100 billion to go fund a regime change war against Russia via Ukraine as a proxy. We have Congress celebrating, hey, we passed over $1 trillion on a so-called infrastructure bill, but our infrastructure across the country is crumbling. And the people who are suffering in communities like East Palestine, they're not getting the attention and the resources they need. The people we have in power in this country just don't care. They don't care about people's lives. For them, the rich and powerful are special. They get special treatment. They can cause sickness and death and destruction, destroying towns, hurting people, destroying the environment. Nothing happens. Civil penalties, really? They don't give a shit. They can literally get away with murder. And there is no response. There is no accountability. This reminds me of the situation we continue to see with the pharmaceutical industry. These people are getting countless Americans hooked by the hundreds of thousands on their drugs, making billions and billions of dollars on getting people hooked on things like OxyContin and other opioids. They're making all this money, causing this addiction, causing death, the loss of loved ones and family members, ruined lives. We know this is true. They're never held accountable. They paid a few bucks in a lawsuit. Do you see any of them in jail? No. However, you've got small-time drug dealers on a street corner in an inner city spending how many years in prison? So what does this tell you? You've got people who are the rich and powerful, people who are able to buy off politicians who get off scot-free, while others who commit much smaller crimes rotting away in prison. As long as we have this two-tier justice system, as long as we the people allow this to continue, this will be the status quo. It has to end. Unfortunately, we don't have leaders in power right now who have the courage and the independence to end it, to take a stand for the people against these corrupt corporations, to end this system of injustice. Now, as long as we have leaders and people in positions of power and responsibility, whether it's in our water supply, sewer system, transportation, air, sea, airlines, as long as they don't care about us, as long as they only care about power or money, then we're going to continue to see these kinds of disasters occurring, just as we have been for far too long. What we really need in this country is a wholesale change in leadership. We need leaders who have a servant's heart, who take on these positions in our government, not out of a desire for fame or political ambition or power or money, but out of a desire to be of service. It's a reason why they're called public servants, that they're committed to serving the American people and our country. We, the people, need to fire these selfish and negligent leaders in our government and select and elect those who put the well-being of the American people and our country first. We need to encourage this change in our society as well, across every part of our society, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector, so that in every part of our country, we are led by those who care, those who have aloha, respect, care, and compassion for our fellow Americans and love for this country that we hold dear.